The Vienna school of fantastic realism arose immediately after the Second World War. The five founders were Fuchs, Hausner, Brauer, Hutter and Lemden. Ernst Fuchs was born in Vienna in 1930. He was interned in a transit camp for part of World War II, due to his father being Jewish. But his mother, being Christian, had him baptized, which saved him from becoming one of the victims of the Nazi Holocaust. After the war, he attended the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. Here he is on the right with his professor Gütersloh. From 1938 until the end of the Second World War, Gütersloh had been banned from his teaching duties by the Nazis, but now was able to take on the role of teacher. There Fuchs met fellow students Arik Brauer, Fritz Janschke, Wolfgang Hutter, Anton Lemden, as well as a somewhat older Rudolf Hausner. One of his early paintings is his 1945 Crucifixion and Self-Portrait with Inga beside the cross. Inga was fellow artist Inga Pace, whose strong Christian religious devotion made an impact on Fuchs. In 1946, some of this small group, painting in much the same style, then thought of as a branch of Surrealism, held an exhibition in the foyer of the Vienna Concert Hall. Their works were removed after a public outcry. Here is one of Fuchs' pencil drawings from that year, a woman's reflection in a row of houses. And the drawing, The Vessel of the Universe, of the same year, which Fuchs considered as among his most important drawings, saying that it influenced many of his later graphic works and paintings. Teaching at the Academy focused on the techniques of the old masters. Fuchs revived the old mixed technique of underpainting in tempera, then adding glazes of oil paint on top. This produced a luminosity to his paintings and also allowed for very detailed imagery. Fuchs, however, was not content to create mere academic paintings. Here is his early piece from 1947, The Night of Time, Lament over the Cosmic Egg, from his Bikini Atoll cycle of paintings. Fuchs describes this as depicting the hermetic cosmic vessel at the boiling point, the bursting forth of the alchemistic dragon in nuclear fission. Nature is seen as a transparent, brittle vessel crumbling into ashes. The lack of any positive response from the Vienna art world and his inability to earn a living from his art led him to move to Paris in 1948. There he set up a studio and met some of the Surrealist artists. Initially he lived in considerable poverty, but by 1951-2 he had achieved a little international recognition. He was very attracted to spiritual ideas, esotericism, religious symbolism, and the Jungian interpretation of symbols. At the Academy, he had learnt the skill of constructing a precise, detailed drawing as the basis for a painting. Here is the emblematic Battle of the Gods that have been transformed of 1952. At first, the work of Fuchs and his group was thought of as a branch of Surrealism. However, they had little direct connection to the established Surrealists. The influential Austrian art critic Johann Muschig felt uncomfortable with their work being labelled in this way, and in the late 1950s coined the term fantastischer Realismus, fantastic realism. This group of artists were not under the influence of Breton's ideas. They did not have to affect an interest in painting their dreams or using automatism in their painting. Instead, they thought deeply about how to structure their paintings, and usually had a very detailed plan, sketch or drawing, to work from. In 1955, he spent a year in America, and though he did not sell many works there, he continued to create some important paintings, such as The Angel of Death over the Gate to Purgatory, which he finished in 1956. While in the USA, he also worked on The Wedding of the Unicorn, which, though started in 1952, was not completed until 1960. Although the group initially experienced a negative response from the art establishment, this quickly turned around, and by the late 1950s and early 60s, they gained favour. Fuchs in particular, being a good publicist for his work, became very successful, even although his work was challenging. In 1958, after returning from his stays in Paris, America and Israel, he founded the Galerie Fuchs-Fischoff in Vienna to promote and support the then emerging painters of the fantastic realism school. From the late 40s through to 1980 can be seen as his golden period, in which he produced most of his major pieces. Here is Moses and the Burning Bush. In 1956, he converted to Roman Catholicism, and this did shape some of the subject matter of his art. He also drew heavily on his Jewish background, and had moved for a while to Israel, where he tried through his art to foster Jewish-Christian understanding. Here is his Christ of 1965. He certainly did not throw out his progressive ideas and become a conventional Catholic. He did not shy away from depicting nudity, eroticism, and painting disturbing images. Even in his early period, he had been engaged by religious themes, as in his drawing Golgotha of 1948-49. Fuchs' drawings are of extremely fine quality. Here is one of a winged hermaphrodite, which possibly is based on an alchemical emblem from an early alchemical manuscript. Fuchs had studied Jung and could have come across this sort of image in one of his books. Between 1958 and 1960, he created his triptych of rosary paintings for the parish church of Hetzendorf in Vienna. At the time, this aroused considerable controversy, and a decade later, in 1979, a disturbed individual ripped down the pictures from the aluminium rods and severely damaged them with numerous knife cuts, but was prevented from burning them with petrol. Happily, they were able to be restored. In a way, this parallels the situation of Salvador Dalí, who in his later period created much controversy with his many paintings on Catholic themes, without embracing the restrictive ideas of the established church. Dalí's St. John of the Cross in Glasgow was similarly vandalized in 1961. Dalí and Fuchs became close friends. Fuchs states that when they met, they did not discuss painting, but physics and theology. Unlike Dalí, Fuchs was always willing to explain the symbolism in his paintings, without any attempt to confuse, mislead, or misdirect the reader. As with Dalí, Fuchs felt he had to adopt a role with the media to help publicize his work. He adopted a persona, often wearing his characteristic kufi cap. In the late 70s and 80s, he focused all his funds and effort on converting the then derelict Otto Wagner villa in Hütteldorf near Vienna into an amazing museum for his work. Through the 1980s and 90s, he worked on large-scale projects such as set design for theatre and film and opera houses in Hamburg, Parsifal and the Magic Flute, in Munich, Lohengrin, and in Vienna, the Tales of Hoffmann. In 1990, he began work on the Apocalypse Chapel at Klagenfurt in Austria. He created oil paintings covering the entire interior of this chapel, which took him about 20 years to complete. Fuchs has always been generous with his time, taking on many students. Thus he has been a great influence on the visionary art of the late 20th and early 21st century. Rudolf Hausner was somewhat older than the other artists who were to become the Vienna Fantastic Realists. His painting in the years before the war had been labelled by the Nazi regime as degenerate. After the war he returned to painting and adopted a Surrealist style, as we see in his puzzling ballet of 1946. That year he founded a small Surrealist group, together with Edgar Jenne, Ernst Fuchs, Wolfgang Hutter, and Fitz Janschke. They were later joined by Arik Brauer and Anton Lemden. In 1948 he produced this painting, This Is Me. However, in 1948 he created his staggering work, The Ark of Odysseus, which set his style for the rest of his life. From then on his work is intensely personal, self-absorbed and introspective. Here we have a portrait of Hausner on the left, holding a locket-type box with images of himself, his father and mother. He sees himself as Odysseus setting out on his great voyage, thus the sailor's cap. He uses this image of the sailor in many of his later paintings. On the right is his ark, gathering together imagery reflecting his past, present and future. The more Freudian of art historians suggest this mass on the right-hand side is Hausner's attempt to picture his unconscious. In 1955, he produced a self-portrait as a somewhat melancholic fool wearing a paper hat. He continually returned to this image throughout his life, as in Fool in a Red Hat of 1963, The Painter in a Paper Hat, 1980, The Colourful Hatted Fool of 1987, Through the Window of 1992, and Father and Son, produced in 1993. In the 1950s, he produced a number of related surreal self-portraits. Adam After the Fall, 1956, and Adam Made Good or Restored, of 1959. He was to become obsessed with this self-portrait of himself as Adam, drawn from the image of his face in a convex mirror. Hausner had studied the psychological theories of Freud and Jung, and was able to consciously reflect elements of these psychological models into his work. This seems to have led to a conflict with the Surrealist orthodoxy, who condemned as heretical his agenda of giving equal importance to both conscious and unconscious processes. In 1959, he co-founded the Vienna School of Fantastic Realism, together with his old Surrealist group members Ernst Fuchs, Fritz Janschke, Wolfgang Hutter, Anton Lemden, and Arik Brauer. In 1962, Hausner met Paul Delvaux, René Magritte, Victor Brauner, and Dorothea Tanning while travelling in Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. In the 1960s, Hausner developed the figure of Adam, so it became his most important pictorial instrument. For, as he said, whatever happens in the painting, someone must be present to whom it happens. Not just a centre, but a figure, a physiognomy, an alter ego of the artist, a test object as the subject of the painting. His 1965 painting, Adam and His Judges, continues this introspection. By the 1970s, the Adam he portrayed seems to have become for him a universal figure, and he presents Adam in a series of tableaux with a rather more widened face. Another of his obsessions was the game of billiards, which obviously played some role in his ideas about chance and skill and planning in human life. This he presents in a number of paintings. He began to explore the Eve or anima figure. Firstly, he saw this as part of himself, as in The Reconciled Anima of 1982. But later he turned to using an image of his wife, Anne. Through the 1980s, he produced his Homage to Leonardo, with its two domains, the light-filled upper section depicting Da Vinci's Last Supper set around a billiard table, while below in the dark underground area, a woman self-immolates with a large pin. This perhaps parallels the billiard cue. He then reworked this as Adam, son of the unloved one. Now the Eve figure in the lower part is clearly that of the anima, based on Hausner's wife Anne. The background shows the landscape of Vienna. Now the scene of the Last Supper around a billiard table is placed on a scaffolding and capped with a conventional Last Supper around a table, while in the scaffold platform below we see a boxing match. A few years later, Hausner reworks this again as Adam, son of the unloved two. Now we find the planks that form the base of the boxing booth have been mostly removed, and the figures box precariously. The figure of Eve in the last two versions is no longer self-immolating, but instead gazes confidently out at the viewer. She holds what appears to be a bobbin, above which floats the planet Saturn. Hausner is giving a Saturnian melancholic image to the anima. Thus we can see that Hausner's work is deeply introspective, but he sought universal values in this seeming self-obsession. Although his work is limited to a very few themes, often appearing repetitive, he stands out above most other modern artists as one who is deeply studied in-depth psychology. It was not merely something he toyed with, but a profound, abiding influence on his art. Arik Brauer is the son of a Jewish shoemaker with Lithuanian roots who grew up in Vienna. His father was murdered by the Nazis in a concentration camp, but Arik, his sister and mother, managed to escape the Holocaust by hiding from the authorities. After the war, he attended the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, alongside Ernst Fuchs. Here's an early photograph of the two from about that time, and his rather fine self-portrait of 1963. As with Fuchs, he faced a difficult task in making a living from his painting initially, but was able to supplement his income by singing and songwriting, and for some decades he became a well-known popular singer. This is his 1959 painting, Thornbush Messiah, in which he was exploring luminosity and form emerging from darkness. In the 1960s, he found a style which was figurative. It exploited luminosity through the use of thin layers of paint on a white ground. This is the Rainmaker of Mount Carmel of 1964. And his painting Paper Dragon of 1966. By the 1970s, he had achieved some recognition. His artworks reflected both his strong political views and his Jewish identity. Here are some of his allegorical political paintings from the 1970s. His 1971 painting, War and Peace Can Be Pulled On and Off Like Gloves. At the same time, he was creating a powerful series of paintings on the persecution of the Jewish people. Here is The Sanctification of the Name. Brauer enthusiastically embraces his Jewish roots, and he was eventually able to buy a property in Israel and became a strong advocate and activist for Jewish identity. Here is his Song of Songs of 2008. His paintings are often allegorical with a clear message, but depicted in an engaging way, as in his Waiting for Equality. He is a strong advocate for environmentalism, thus his Flower of Chernobyl, which is both beautiful and deadly. Wolfgang Hutter was the son of art professor Gütersloh at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. He was thus a member of the group of young artists around Fuchs. Among his early works is his Adam and Eve of 1955. He does not appear to have been driven, as were Fuchs, Hausner and Brauer, by ideological, psychological, political, philosophical or religious impulses, but instead set himself to creating some delightful and engaging paintings. As his style emerged, we see how he simplifies forms, as in his 1965 painting, The Arsonists. He became quite drawn to depicting multiple eyes, possibly taking this from some of the drawings and paintings of Fuchs. Thus his 1970 painting, The Eyes of the Bridegroom, and also The Magic Room of 1973. In his later work, he almost reduces his depiction of plants to ribbons or paper cut-out forms. Anton Lemden was also one of the founders of the Vienna School of Fantastic Realism. As with Wolfgang Hutter, he developed a style and stuck with it. Unlike Fuchs, Hausner and Brauer, he did not appear to have an underlying philosophical agenda and tended to produce landscapes. Here is an early work of his, Day and Night, from 1957. He became much influenced by Chinese landscape painting, as in his Vienna of 1967, and often worked in watercolour. And a later work from 1974, The Bosporus, is very characteristic of his later pieces. The Vienna school of fantastic realism had a significant impact, especially on the European art world. It showed a way forward for figurative art at a time when the art establishment in America and Europe was turning away from surrealism and embracing the banalities of abstraction. Fuchs and his group had a profound influence on the figurative art of the second half of the 20th century, continuing up till the present day. In our next lesson we will look at some of the second generation of fantastic realist painters.